What happens when old rivalries, buried for centuries, are stirred by the promise of liberation and the hunger for land? In 1912, the Balkans answered that question with fire. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had ruled this rugged peninsula. Janissaries once patrolled cobblestone streets. Byzantine bells had been silenced under the call to prayer. And the crescent banner flew over cities like Thessaloniki, Monastir, and Adrianople. But by the dawn of the 20th century, the empire was crumbling. Defeat in Libya against Italy in 1911 revealed its weakness. The treasury was drained, the army stretched thin, villages rose in revolt. Guerrilla bands prowled the forests, and Europe whispered one phrase again and again: the Balkan powder keg. Each neighbor circled, sharpening its claim. Serbia dreamed of uniting the South Slavs, creating a future Yugoslavia. Bulgaria longed to restore the empire imagined in the Treaty of San Stefano, a Bulgaria that reached to the Aegean and Adriatic. Greece looked northward to Macedonia and Epirus, invoking the the great idea of uniting all Greek lands. Montenegro, small but unyielding, sought glory in its mountain traditions. In taverns and parliaments, in secret lodges and royal palaces, envoys whispered of alliance. By spring 1912, treaties were signed. Serbia and Bulgaria pledged to fight the Ottomans together. Greece and Montenegro joined soon after. Thus was born the Balkan League, presented as a brotherhood of liberation, but beneath the surface, stitched together by rivalry and ambition. Each nation spoke of freeing Christians from Ottoman rule, but each kept hidden maps, where borders extended just a little further than promises allowed. The Ottomans knew the danger. Their European provinces, Kosovo, Macedonia, Thrace, were restless. Albanian revolts shook the mountains. Chetnik bands, Komataji raiders, and Greek irregulars ambushed patrols, torching villages before melting back into the hills. Retaliation followed with equal cruelty. Streams of refugees clogged the roads, autumn rains turning the tracks to mud. The land itself seemed to prepare for war. By October 1912, the fuse was lit. Montenegro declared war first. Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece followed within days. Picture the armies on the move. 500,000 men stirred across the peninsula. Serbian infantry, clad in gray, their shajkacha caps pulled low, marched south with Mannlicher rifles slung across their shoulders, singing songs of Kosovo and liberation. Bulgarian columns, disciplined and silent, advanced eastward in khaki uniforms, their German-made Mausers gleaming, heavy artillery dragged behind them over muddy roads. Greek battalions surged north, some in modern khaki, others still wearing the white fustanella skirts of mountain warriors, while their navy steamed into the Aegean, ready to cut Ottoman supply lines. From Montenegro, rugged fighters in red caps descended from the highlands, rifles older than themselves but spirits unbroken. Against them stood the remnants of Ottoman might. Soldiers in dark blue tunics and red fezes manned their positions. Many carried German-made Mauser rifles modern enough, but supplies were scarce, ammunition limited, and units unevenly equipped. Their ranks were a patchwork. Turks from Anatolia, Albanians from Kosovo, Arabs from Syria, all bound under the green banner of Islam. Brave and determined, but hampered by poor logistics, exhausted by recent wars, and led by officers unsure how long the empire could endure. The Balkans themselves became a weapon. Mountains echoed with gunfire. Rivers swollen with autumn rain carried the bodies of the fallen. Monasteries and minarets alike loomed over valleys where cannons thundered. In the distance, church bells clashed with the call to prayer, before both were drowned out by artillery. Smoke and mud became the true banners of this war. For those who marched, this was not only a campaign. It was memory, faith, revenge. Priests walked with regiments, blessing rifles with holy water. Mothers pressed crosses into the palms of their sons, knowing many would not return. Farmers laid down their plows, picked up bayonets, and stepped into history. In Sofia, Belgrade, and Athens, posters promised a war of liberation. Newspapers printed maps of a new Balkans where Ottoman shadow was erased. But behind the slogans lurked the truth. When liberation came, it would ride on fire and destruction. Now, as October rains fell, columns of soldiers converged on Ottoman strongholds. Serbia marched into Kosovo and Macedonia. Bulgaria stormed into Thrace, its eyes fixed on Adrianople. Greece advanced into Epirus and northern Macedonia, while its navy sealed the straits. Montenegro encircled fortresses in the north. And yet, the Ottoman Empire was not yet dead. In Adrianople, Shkodra, and Ioannina, its soldiers braced for desperate last stands. Europe watched nervously diplomats in Vienna and St. Petersburg bent over maps, fearing that this local war could trigger something far greater. The powder keg had been struck. The First Balkan War had begun. Now hold your breath and let's walk through a history that no one dares admit began. What does victory look like when every nation fights not only for freedom, but for the same land? In the autumn of 1912, the Balkan League marched, and even in triumph, betrayal already cast its shadow. The first shots came from the mountains of Montenegro. On October 8, Montenegrin artillery opened fire on Ottoman fortresses near Shkodra. It was a symbolic beginning, the smallest kingdom striking first, a signal that the Balkans would wait no longer. Within days, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece declared war. Europe's diplomats stirred uneasily, but the armies were already in motion. Columns of soldiers snaked through mountain passes. Boots sank in mud, wagons groaned under artillery, horses steamed in the cold. Along the roads, villagers watched their sons depart, some waving flags, others weeping in silence. In the capitals, church bells rang. At the front, the sound was harsher. Rifles loaded, bayonets fixed, wheels grinding through ruts. Serbia struck swiftly into Kosovo. This was sacred ground, the field of Kosovo Polje, where in 1389 Serbian knights had fallen before the Ottomans. Now, more than 5 centuries later, they returned. On October 23-24, at the Battle of Kumanovo, Serbian forces clashed with the Ottoman Vardar army. Artillery pounded Ottoman lines until they broke. Skopje fell, then Pristina. Villages cheered, and the dream of Serbia's revival seemed alive again. To the east, Bulgaria launched the largest campaign. Nearly 600,000 men had been mobilized, though about 300,000 advanced into Thrace. Well drilled and equipped with Krupp artillery, they struck at Kirk-Kalis, Lozengrad, on October 23. Ottoman resistance collapsed. The Bulgarian flag rose over the town the next day. The advance pressed on to the Battle of Lule-Burgas, Bunarhisar, Oct 28 Nov 2, one of the war's largest clashes. For days, artillery shook the plains, villages burned, soldiers fell in rows through mud and smoke. By early November, the Ottomans retreated to the Chatalka line, the last defense before Constantinople itself. For the first time in centuries, the Ottoman capital seemed in danger. Europe gasped. In Vienna, officials feared a stronger Serbia. In St. Petersburg, Russian generals cheered Slavic victories. In London and Paris, newspapers warned that a Balkan fire might consume all of Europe. Meanwhile, the Greek army surged northward. Led by Crown Prince Constantine, divisions raced for Thessaloniki, the coveted jewel of Macedonia. The navy, with the armored cruiser Georgios Avarov, swept Ottoman ships from the Aegean. With sea control secure, Greek troops advanced inland. On November 8, Ottoman commanders surrendered Thessaloniki to Greece just days before Bulgarian units could arrive. The city's capture became a triumph for Athens and a source of fury in Sofia. Montenegro, though small, waged its own bitter struggle at Shkodra. Artillery hammered the fortress walls as soldiers in red caps crouched in trenches, soaked by rain, rifles slick with water. Inside, defenders endured hunger and disease. The siege became one of the war's most grueling ordeals, testing endurance more than firepower. By November, the Ottoman position looked desperate. Serbian armies swept into Macedonia, joining advancing Greeks. Bulgarians reached the outskirts of Constantinople, staring across at Chatalka. Refugees flooded the roads, families with ox carts, priests clutching icons, children stumbling through mud. The Balkans became a land of smoke and sorrow. Yet the empire was not finished. At Chatalka, Nov 1718, 1912, fortified Ottoman troops held firm. Bulgarian assaults collapsed under rifle, fire, machine guns, and disease. Constantinople remained Ottoman. Even in victory, the Balkan League showed cracks. Serbia wanted Macedonia. Bulgaria demanded the same. Greece had seized Thessaloniki, which Bulgaria also claimed. What had begun as a war of liberation was turning into a contest for spoils. By December, snow covered the Balkans. The fortress of Adrianople, Edirne, was surrounded by Bulgarian and Serbian forces, its garrison starving but defiant. In Epirus, Greek troops pushed toward Ioannina. Every victory brought the League closer to its goals and closer to betrayal. The Balkan League had shaken the Ottoman Empire to its core. But as their armies closed around its last strongholds, a darker truth emerged. The greatest battles would not only be against the Sultan's armies, but against each other. When an empire begins to collapse, who suffers most? The soldiers in the trenches or the civilians caught in the storm? By late November 1912, the Ottoman Empire bled from every wound. Its armies were driven from Macedonia and Thrace. Its fleets no longer ruled the Aegean. Yet the empire did not surrender. It clung desperately to its last fortresses, while the Balkan League prepared for sieges that would test not just strength, but endurance. The greatest prize was Adrianople, modern Edirne. Once the Ottoman capital before Constantinople, it now stood as the shield of Thrace. Behind its 19th century bastions, Shukri Pasha commanded around 61,000 regular soldiers and nearly 18,000 militia, vowing to fight to the last bullet. Civilians crowded cellars as shells rained down. Bread was rationed, horses slaughtered. Children cried from hunger while cannons thundered. Encircling the city, Bulgarian and Serbian troops dug trenches into frozen earth. Soldiers huddled in tattered coats, rifles stiff with frost. Serbian artillery, dragged through mud and snow, fired day and night. The siege became a nightmare of mud, rats, and smoke. Some froze to death. Others whispered folk songs to keep despair away. Adrianople turned into a crucible victory, promised glory, but each day drained lives. To the west, Montenegro battered Shkodra. King Nicholas's men, in their red caps, dug trenches so close they could hear the garrison shouting back. Cannon fire rolled through valleys where refugees hid in caves. Weeks dragged into months. Hunger gnawed at both besiegers and besieged, while disease spread in damp trenches. Winter was the most merciless enemy. Southward, Greece had already claimed Thessaloniki. On the 8th of November 1912, Crown Prince Constantine entered the city, forcing its surrender. Greek flags rose above the White Tower, bells rang out. Yet beneath the celebrations, tension grew. Both Serbia and Bulgaria coveted the port. Thessaloniki was more than victory. It was a spark of mistrust smoldering within the League. Far from the trenches, new conflict brewed. On the 28th of November 1912, Albanian leaders in Vlori declared independence, rejecting both Ottoman rule and Balkan occupation. Their voice was small compared to the clash of armies, but Europe listened. At the London Conference in December, the great powers recognized, at least in principle, the creation of an independent Albania. For Serbia, this was a bitter blow. Having conquered Kosovo and Macedonia, its troops longed to march to the Adriatic. But Austria-Hungary warned, touch the Albanian coast and it means war. Russia counseled caution. Serbia's dream of a seaport collapsed under diplomatic pressure, leaving frustration and anger. Meanwhile, suspicion poisoned the League. Serbia accused Bulgaria of seeking too much in Thrace. Bulgaria seethed at Greece's seizure of Thessaloniki. Greece feared being squeezed by both. Montenegro begged for help at Shkodra, but its allies gave little. The alliance, forged in the language of liberation, strained under ambition. And still, soldiers and civilians endured. Around Adrianople, men wrapped themselves in thin blankets, boots frozen to the ground. At Shkodra, both sides buried comrades lost to hunger. In Macedonian villages, families stumbled through snow, icons and livestock piled on carts. The victories of October had turned into December's stagnation, a war of waiting where cold and starvation killed as surely as bullets. Europe too waited. In Vienna, officials feared Serbia's rise would inflame Slavs inside Austria-Hungary. In St. Petersburg, Russian generals rejoiced, but worried Austria might intervene. In London, Paris, and Berlin, newspapers declared the Ottomans finished, yet diplomats whispered a darker fear. If the League turned on itself, would all Europe burn? By the year's end, snow blanketed the Balkans. Soldiers who had marched out to cheers now prayed only to survive. Civilians hid from both armies, knowing neither hunger nor fire spared the innocent. Adrianople and Shkodra still held grim symbols of Ottoman defiance. But within the League, unity melted away, replaced by rivalry, suspicion, and betrayal, waiting to erupt. The Balkan League had been forged in fire. By the winter of 1912, its victories revealed a darker truth. In destroying the Ottomans, the Allies had sown the seeds of their own undoing. When victory is within reach, what matters more, unity or ambition? In the winter of 1913, the Balkan League discovered that sometimes triumph is the most dangerous enemy of all. Snow blanketed the Balkans, but the war did not rest. The long sieges that had drained armies for months reached their breaking point. At Adrianople, modern Edirne, the Bulgarian army tightened its grip. Trenches scarred the frozen plains, filled with men in tattered coats, rifles crusted with frost. Artillery roared day and night, tearing bastions apart. Serbian guns added their thunder. Inside, despair ruled. Civilians boiled leather into soup. Soldiers gnawed horse meat. Disease stalked the cellars where families huddled together. In March 1913, the final assault began. Bulgarian infantry stormed the shattered walls, ladders scraping stone, bayonets flashing in the dawn. Machine guns rattled, but wave after wave surged forward. "Za Zarya!" they shouted. By March 26, Shukri Pasha surrendered. Adrianople fell. Bulgarian flags rose over the ruins. For Sofia, it was the crowning triumph. For the Ottomans, the end of an era, the gateway to Constantinople lost. Far to the west, Shkodra endured. Montenegrin soldiers, gaunt and frostbitten, supported by Serbian artillery and reinforcements, clung to trenches, pounding the fortress by day, trading fire by night. Inside, civilians starved beside a stubborn garrison. By April, the city agreed to surrender, but not to Montenegro. Austro-Hungarian warships appeared, backed by European demands. Shkodra was handed instead to the new state of Albania. For King Nicholas, the victory turned bitter. Months of sacrifice erased by foreign dictates. Meanwhile, Greek flags fluttered over Thessaloniki. For Athens, it was triumph. For Bulgaria, a wound. In Macedonia, Serbian troops occupied towns Sofia claimed under secret treaties. The fragile unity of the League cracked. Allies who had marched together now eyed one another with suspicion, hands near their swords. In London, diplomats spread maps across polished tables, drawing lines in ink that ignored the rivers of blood spilled. Albania was carved from Ottoman ruins, blocking Serbia's path to the sea. Kosovo and most of Macedonia went to Serbia. Greece kept Thessaloniki and Epirus. Bulgaria received Thrace, including Adrianople. On paper, victory, but for each, incomplete. Serbia seethed at losing the Adriatic. Bulgaria resented Serbia and Greece over Macedonia. Greece feared Bulgarian designs on Thessaloniki. Montenegro mourned Shkodra. The Ottoman Empire, humiliated but not erased, clung to Constantinople and a thin strip of Thrace. For the first time in centuries, its banners no longer flew over most of the Balkans. Yet instead of celebration, resentment darkened the peninsula. In Belgrade, soldiers returned to parades, but frustration simmered victory denied them a seaport. In Sofia, men hailed as heroes returned proud of Adrianople, but embittered that Macedonia had slipped away. In Athens, bells rang, yet leaders braced for the day Bulgaria might march on Thessaloniki. In Cetinje, Montenegrin troops limped home hollow-eyed, their sacrifice unrewarded. For common soldiers, there was little glory. They came back to farms burned, villages emptied, families scattered. Refugees filled the roads, Serbs from Kosovo, Turks from Thrace, Greeks from Macedonia, all displaced by shifting borders. Hunger and disease stalked the land more ruthlessly than any army. By spring 1913, the First Balkan War had ended, but a new conflict was already forming. Bulgaria, proud and restless, felt betrayed. Serbia and Greece, unwilling to yield their gains, prepared to resist. The league that had broken Ottoman power now teetered on the edge of fratricide. The powder keg had not been diffused. It had only passed from one hand to another. What happens when allies turn their rifles on each other? In the summer of 1913, the Balkan League, victorious against the Ottoman Empire, shattered in betrayal. The powder keg had not gone silent. it exploded again. The First Balkan War ended with treaties, but treaties could not bind ambition. Serbia demanded more of Macedonia, claiming it had shed the most blood. Bulgaria pointed to its triumphs at Adrianople and Lulaburgas, insisting the land was rightfully theirs. Greece refused to surrender Thessaloniki, the jewel of the Aegean. Montenegro still burned with anger at losing Shkodra to foreign dictates. The league that had marched as brothers now seethed with rivalry. Russia, alarmed, tried to mediate between its Slavic protégés. Austria-Hungary warned Serbia to curb its appetite, but the voices of diplomacy were drowned out by the drums of war. In Sofia, generals urged action. They believed Bulgaria's army, bloodied, battle-hardened, yet still disciplined, could crush Serbia and Greece quickly, seizing Macedonia by force. The government hesitated, then yielded. On the night of the 29th of June 1913, Bulgarian troops attacked without warning. Across the dark hills of Macedonia, bayonets glinted in the moonlight. Rifles cracked. Men who had once shared bread in the same trenches now cut each other down. The Second Balkan War had begun. At first, Bulgarian columns pushed forward, scattering surprised Serbian and Greek outposts. Villages that had celebrated liberation only months earlier now burned under artillery fire. But within days, the tide shifted. At the Battle of Bregalnica, June 29, July 9, Serbian troops rallied. The valley shook with thunder as tens of thousands clashed. Serbian artillery pounded Bulgarian lines. Smoke rolled across the hills, and the Vardar River ran thick with bodies. Bulgaria's advance faltered, then broke. From the south, Greek divisions surged under Crown Prince Constantine. At Kilkis, Lachanas, July 4-11, they stormed Bulgarian trenches with bayonets fixed, uphill under withering fire. The clash was brutal, the ground littered with corpses. But the Greeks prevailed. They pressed northward, capturing Dwyron and driving deep into Bulgarian-held Macedonia. The war grew savage. Civilians fled once again, ox carts creaking under the weight of bedding and children, their faces hollow with fear. Farmhouses smoked in the distance. In villages, churches were looted, mosques desecrated. Vengeance had replaced liberation, neighbor turned against neighbor, and the land itself seemed cursed. As Bulgaria struggled, new enemies pounced. From the north, Romania marched across the border, claiming southern Dobruja. Romania had shed no blood in the First Balkan War, yet now demanded its reward. Bulgarian troops, already stretched thin, could offer little resistance. The loss was swift and humiliating. From the east came an even deeper wound. The Ottoman Empire, humiliated months earlier, seized its chance for revenge. On July 22, Ottoman divisions swept back into Thrace, retaking Adrianople. The green banners rose again over the city Bulgaria had bled so dearly to capture. For Sofia, it was a humiliation almost unbearable. The crown of victory ripped away by an enemy thought defeated. Desperation set in. At the Kresna Gorge, late July 1913, Bulgarian soldiers dug trenches along rocky cliffs, determined to make a last stand. The gorge echoed with rifle fire and exploding shells. Waves of Serbian infantry advanced, only to be hurled back by desperate counterattacks. Hand-to-hand combat raged in the ravines, bayonets clashing, grenades bursting, the river below running red. For a moment, it seemed Bulgaria might salvage a defiant victory, but the numbers were overwhelming. Serbia pressed from the west, Greece from the south, Romania from the north, and the Ottomans from the east. Encircled, exhausted, starving, Bulgaria could fight no longer. In August 1913, it sued for peace. The Treaty of Bucharest, the 10th of August 1913, redrew the map once more. Serbia emerged enlarged, swallowing much of Macedonia and swelling with new confidence. Greece secured Thessaloniki and much of southern Macedonia, cementing its role as a rising Balkan power. Romania walked away with southern Dobruja, a prize won without a major battle. The Ottoman Empire clawed back Adrianople, proving it was not yet finished. And Bulgaria, once hailed as the mightiest army of the League, stood humiliated, its ambitions shattered, its people embittered. The cost was staggering. In less than 2 years of war, over 200,000 soldiers were killed, and more than 400,000 others were wounded or fell sick. Civilians paid an even heavier price. Fields lay barren, villages blackened, cities scarred with shellfire. Refugees wandered endless roads, clutching icons or scraps of possessions, their children barefoot in the dust. Orphans huddled in ruins, their cries swallowed by silence. Freedom had come at a price so high that it resembled ruin. The great powers watched closely. In Vienna, Austria-Hungary looked at Serbia's expansion and trembled, fearing the spark of Slavic nationalism in its own provinces. In St. Petersburg, Russia cheered Serbian gains but mourned Bulgaria's humiliation, watching its influence in Sofia collapse. In Berlin and London, ministers measured each new border, aware that the balance of Europe was tilting. The Balkans were no longer a regional quarrel. They were a rehearsal for something far greater. And so the powder kegs smoldered on. Only a year later, in June 1914, a young Bosnian Serb named Gavrilo Princip would raise a pistol on the streets of Sarajevo. His bullet struck down Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. The explosion that followed would engulf the world. The Balkan Wars ended, but the smoke never cleared. In ruined villages, in frost-covered helmets abandoned in trenches, in the bitterness of betrayed allies, a warning was carved into history. When ambition outweighs unity, destruction follows. The spark that began here in the Balkans did not die. It leapt across empires, across continents, until the whole world was on fire. The guns fell silent in 1913, but silence did not mean peace. Across the Balkans, the scars remained in burned fields, in empty villages, in the eyes of children who had lost everything. Nations celebrated victories, yet their triumphs were carved from the suffering of their neighbors. The Balkan Wars remind us of a truth too often forgotten. When ambition eclipses unity, freedom becomes another name for ruin. Soldiers fought for dreams of liberation, but civilians paid the highest price. In the end, no side won what it truly sought. And yet, these struggles shaped the century that followed. Within a year, Sarajevo would ignite the First World War, proving that a spark in one corner of Europe could set the whole world aflame. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, if you had lived then, where would history have placed you, marching under banners of liberation or fleeing with your family into the unknown? If this journey moved you, please like and subscribe to keep these human stories alive, and tell us in the comments, what lesson have you found so far?